Let's go first to Mike on the line here. Mike, where are you calling from tonight? You're on Free Talk Live.
I'm calling from Pennsylvania.
Welcome. You are on the air. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm calling. One of your listeners told me about you guys and your show. I'm the falconer who got caught up in charges related to what I'm licensed to do, which is to breed raptors and to use them in the sport of falconry.
Now, I thought raptors went extinct back in the day. They have those in Jurassic Park,
birds
right?
of prey, you dolt.
Yeah, you're thinking of,
now, come on, let's be adults.
Okay, so I've never heard of a raptor outside of Jurassic Park. So is that an actual type of bird, or is it like a generic term for birds of prey?
That's a generic word for birds of prey. That's
I see.
Precise. Yep.
Okay, so you breed birds of prey, and you got in trouble for it?
Well, I breed birds of prey, and I'm also a licensed falconer.
And a licensed falconer is one who hunts with falcons?
Exactly. Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
And generally, in the United States, there are about 4,000 to 4,500 of us. Generally, the only people that are raptor propagators are people that were falconers or are falconers. So we are operated under a set of rules set up by U.S. Fish and Wildlife under the Department of Interior. And what's crazy is the draconian penalties under these rules come from a migratory bird treaty established in the early 1900s. And that treaty basically was to deal with poachers and illegal sellers of wildlife. Well, that's the same authority by which Fish and Wildlife governs us. So what I was surprised to find is when they decided to charge me with something, it fell into one of two categories. I was either going to be a felon or I was going to have a misdemeanor criminal charge, although petty offense.
So wait, how long had you been doing this breeding before these criminal charges came at you?
8 years for the breeding, and falconry I've been at for, going on 30 years.
Okay. So where did these charges come from all of a sudden?
Well, they actually were pushed by a guy at the state level here in Pennsylvania, who is the head of the Special Permits Office. Special permits is like everything.
Permits.
Yeah, special permits. I feel very special.
Mm-hmm.
But they cover about 70,000 permits. Say a guy wants to breed deer, or somebody wants to do some scientific collection of a certain species. They go to that department. And falconers are about 4,000 in the U.S., so you'd have to meet another 75,000 people to meet your next falconer, 350 million people. So in the same way, the persons at the permits office very rarely know what they're doing in relation to what we do. Mm-hmm. But yet they will tell you things that contradict even the law.
Of course they will. That's how bureaucrats operate. They don't know their own rules and usually don't care about them.
One brain can't accommodate all of their rules. They're no more capable of it than we are.
Well, yeah, and what's interesting is when they don't know the rules, what they do is they make them up. And if you catch them making them up, they don't want to take back the last rule they made up. So they tell you they're sticking to their guns, regardless of what the law says. And here's what I found out after they charged me with this. When you pay a $300 an hour D.C. law firm that handles wildlife law, what they found out, which was quite interesting, is in the state code of Pennsylvania. Anybody can Google it, PA state code, and then, quote, propagation stock, end quote. And what you'll find is it says you may not remove any wild animal or bird, comma, except raptors for propagation stock. Well, that's exactly the permits I have. I have a raptor propagation permit from both the state and federal authorities. And yet this turned into an 8-month ordeal where after spending over $25,000, I was found not guilty in federal court.
Wow.
How much money?
$25,000.
At least 25, and that's not counting my state attorney.
Did they write you a check back for that?
If you'd had a choice, I would call that a Pyrrhic victory, but since you didn't have any choice but to fight, I'll just salute you for winning.
Well, thank you. If I had signed the ticket, then I would have been pleading nolle contendere to the charge, meaning guilty to the charge, and it would only cost me $325. But what generally happens, based on my knowledge of this climate with falconers and my history in the community, what generally happens is they then move to remove your permits. once you plead no contest. So it was a catch-22 where if I pled no contest to make it go away, there was a good chance I'd lose one or both of my permits. And if I fought it, I was going to have to spend a lot of money. So we chose to fight it. And we're not done yet because we're not sure if the state is going to come back at us, even though they lost miserably in federal court. Let me tell you, on the 18th, we had the federal prosecutor, a U.S. attorney, a silver-haired guy who just put the last state treasurer in prison, okay? So those are the kind of cases he normally handles. His assistant, the special agent, which is basically a fish and game person at the federal level, the local WCO, which is the Wildlife Conservation Office, the permits guy, his underling, and several other people, including a lawyer, about 8 people against me for a petty misdemeanor, petty offense. It was absolutely ridiculous.
And the allegation was what? A paperwork snafu? I mean, what were they alleging?
They alleged that I took a bird without authority to propagate, even though I have a raptor propagation permit from the state of Pennsylvania.
So, like just a state park or something like that?
Well, falconers are allowed to remove. We're the only hunters that takes home something alive. We're permitted to. The only way you could get a bird of prey in America if you become a falconer, you initially have to trap your own bird. That's part of the process.
Mike, stand by. I've got some more questions for you if you can hang on. We're with Mike Dupree here. He's a falconer who just spent a whole lot of money trying to defend his freedoms. It's Free Talk Live. Mike Dupree is with us, and he is on the line, I think. Where are you calling from tonight? Was it Pennsylvania, Mike?
Central Pennsylvania, yes.
Now, you just got finished with a court case, apparently. There's actually an article over at Huffington Post about you. I'm going to post that on our Facebook, Google+, and Twitter so our listeners can learn more about your situation. But from what I've understood so far, you, for kind of what you do, is you breed birds of prey for the purposes of falconry, which is hunting with birds of prey. And you had just told us that the federal government and the state government apparently went after you for violating some sort of paperwork thing where you were telling us that you apparently you'd gotten some sort of a bird from the wild for the purpose of breeding that bird. And Correct. You were just getting into how they ended up finding out about that, or what it was that triggered them coming after you.
It's a great way of framing how they ended up finding out about it. How they ended up finding out about it is I sent my local game officer an email saying, I need 3 bands for these birds. You put leg bands on them that identify the specific bird. So when you fill out a piece of paper, it has a serial number basically associated with that bird. So I reported to them that I've got these birds under my permit and I'd like to register them.
And was this something you'd done a bunch of times in the past? Because you said you've been doing this for 8 years.
Well, I'd done it a bunch of times in the past for falconry, where it's been around for a long time. What happened was about 4 years ago, the federal regs changed on propagation, and when I was reading those propagation regs, I noticed that it allowed a take from the wild. A take means that you take an immature or a young bird. And the reason that's allowed is because 70 to 90% of raptors are dead in the first year of their life. Okay. So a falconer taking one, Fish and Wildlife has studied it, does zero effect to the wild populations with that kind of mortality rate, and so few of us doing it. So the new regs said I was allowed to do this. I contacted the regional office in Hadley, Mass. They confirmed that. They even sent me an email telling me what would be on my next permit. I checked with the state, and the state permits guy said, when you get the bird, I'll send you the band. So I thought I was good to go. It was just that because I got a 3rd bird this past year, normally it's 1, 0, or 2, it seemed to put it over this threshold for them where what they did, in fact, is not acknowledge the fact that I have 2 discrete permits I pay for, each of which allows the take of 2 birds per year with a maximum of 5 for the falconry permit.
So you can have a maximum of 5 birds?
5 wild birds.
Okay. So you believed that you were following their rules. You were, trying to be a so-called law-abiding person or whatever.
Correct.
And they came after you for this.
Yes, and I didn't just believe it. I did my due diligence. I contacted the regional office. I contacted the state office.
Reading those awful, boring regulations. My goodness. Yep. Who wants to do that nonsense?
Have you considered suing them?
What's that?
Have you considered suing them for false arrest?
Yes, we're exploring that now. One of the beauties of all this is there was a gentleman, I do public speaking related to the subject, and there was a gentleman I'd met who was a member of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and I contacted him the Saturday before the special agent showed up by surprise on Monday. And I told him the whole situation, and he wasn't too surprised. He said, Mike, a guy gets a pet squirrel, and they come in like, I won't even say what he said, but you can imagine, like stormtroopers. Mm-hmm. And so when I told him what was happening, he ended up at my house when they arrived that Monday, because that's when I discovered a special agent from Fish and Wildlife would be joining my local game commissioner. Mm-hmm. And he basically got from them what they wanted and escorted them, away and just said thank you and, let's set up a meeting and see if we can resolve this down in Harrisburg. Well, apparently they weren't having any of that. They moved forward to charge me, and 30 days later, the charge was basically just a ticket, but I told you what the penalties were, so it was quite serious.
Having experienced the FBI, I'd tell you that the only thing lower than a cop is a special agent.
Now, just to recap, the penalties you were facing were what? I thought it was like a $300 fine.
Well, it was. If I chose to pay the fine, it would have been simply $325.
Oh, right, but then they would take your license because, he violated our rules, so no more license for you, right?
That's the history of my community and lawyers that have researched it, is then they do that. So it puts you into the category for the rest of your life of being a criminal. Now, I've never been so much as frisked. I've never been locked up. I've never had a DUI. I've had a few speeding tickets. That's about it in my whole life.
Now, question for you. I mean, obviously, you were trying to jump through the hoops. But if you had just gone out and gotten these birds and started breeding them without informing the government goons, how would you have gotten caught in theory?
Well, the way I would have gotten caught is the fact that I became a licensed falconer and licensed propagator. So they have a list of all the people to target.
Yeah, I see.
So, for example, in 1997,
but I think he's asking if you had never filed any paperwork at all with the state.
Well, that wasn't my question, but had you never filed, then, I mean, in theory, somebody would have had to have snitched you out, right?
Yeah, I would be doing it illegally and so on and so forth.
That's probably even more serious, right, if you get busted doing that.
You would think it is, but people that do illegal things with migratory birds, for example, in 1997, I'm living 20 miles outside of D.C. in Silver Spring, Maryland. A guy shoots my hawk, my federally protected hawk that I had purchased. Mm-hmm. Guy shoots it, dead. I know where the guy lives. I contact the state. I contact Fish and Wildlife Service. No one ever shows up to get a report. No one files a ticket. Nothing gets done. Nothing. Zero.
You put yourself on their radar, and they punished you for it, even though you'd been jumping through all their hoops and paying the fines. Tell me, Mike, where can people learn more about your situation and what you do?
Well, I have a Facebook page.
Yep.
It's Mike Dupuy Falconry.
And it's spelled Dupuy. I apologize, I was mispronouncing it earlier.
That's correct. Yeah, you got it perfect, actually. Mike Dupuy Falconry on Facebook, which is a public page where I post these things. In fact, they used one of my postings as evidence that I had the 3 birds, even though I told them I had the 3 birds months before. The judge basically, he didn't buy it. He didn't think I was trying to do anything illegal.
No, that's good.
So you won and had to pay $25,000
Yay, what a win.
To win.
I hope you can prevail, Mike, in court ultimately with your civil case. And I want to thank you for calling Free Talk Live and sharing your story here tonight. Just goes to show, thank you again. It just goes to show, it doesn't matter, even if you think you know the rules, even if you've done your due diligence, you've called the bureaucrats, you've read the regulations.
They just make up crap on their own.
They'll come after you anyway.
Crazy.
Because they can. 855-450-FREE. No one is safe, not even somebody who wanted to breed one of these birds. He wanted to make more of them for the world. 855-450-FREE. You can share your thoughts. More coming up here on Free Talk Live.